Another episode here of Getting There with Goss, where we talk about the career journeys of media members, athletes, coaches, business owners, and more from upstate New York. On this episode, I'm joined by one of my pals and my buddies, CBS 6 in Albany's sports anchor, Gardner Royce. And this is the first time I've ever done this, except for radio DJs. Gardner, I have to open with this. Is that actually your real name? Is your real name Gardner Royce?
Yes, it is. Gardner's a family name. So my grandfather's Robert Gardner Royce. My mom's Margaret Gardner Royce. My great grandfather actually has the same name as me, Gardner. So yes, it is.
All right, it is not a fake TV name. This is not a Trey Wingo scenario. It's a Guild Sports Center commercial.
No.
All right, so let's go back to the family. For those who aren't familiar with it, take us back. Where'd you grow up as a kid? 6, 7, 8 years old. What'd you want to be? And was it the same dream job you wanted when you were 18 years old?
So born in San Francisco, but then moved when I was like half a years old to Washington, D.C. And then we lived with my aunt for a year and then moved to Tacoma Park, Maryland, which I have a sign right in my apartment that says like living on the edge. Tacoma Park is split half Maryland, half DC. And so grew up on Woodland Avenue in Tacoma Park, Maryland. I'm going to backtrack, but in 7th grade, actually moved just further down the street. So my parents have lived my entire adult life on the same street. When I was 7 or 8 years old, what did I want to be? Probably a basketball player. I loved basketball and then played basketball until I got cut in high school and then had a life crisis and got into journalism.
So that was it. You thought you were going to be the next, I don't know, Washington Wizard, then Bullet probably, standout player, and instead it's journalism. So journalism's the pivot here, Big J journalist. So when you're 18, are you starting to look at schools? Where do you want to go? Is the goal when you hit college to be a journalist? And if so, why'd you pick the certain school you attended?
So it backtrack a little bit. My dad gave me one of those Sports Illustrated books. I think it's behind me, actually. I don't know if you can see it. When the Crowd Roared. And so
I had the same book, Gardner, with all the good moments and stuff.
Oh,
yes.
yeah. And it came in the front with the audio discs
that
go along. Oh, yeah. And Bob Costas introed all of these famous calls. And so growing up with that, I think that was kind of where the seed was first planted. My dad's a huge sports fan. Grew up reading the Washington Post in the morning with him. And then throughout high school, wrote for my high school newspaper. And so then 18, when I'm a junior, senior, starting to look at colleges, I knew I wanted to do something with journalism. And so, yeah, that completely, that's how I looked at colleges. I wanted them to have a good communication school. And then once I started getting interested in broadcast journalism, was looking at that because that's also often a component of the film school. So it's not always in the communications department.
Yeah, and I was going to say, it's usually always like the same names we hear, right? Like Ithaca, Oswego, Syracuse, Northwestern. You are about to drop a name for a college that I don't think people even realize exists.
Chapman University out in Orange County, California. It's like about 40 miles south of Los Angeles. They have it's a smaller school, so it's, I think maybe around between 5,000 and 10,000 students. They have a very well-regarded film school, the Dodge College of Film and Media Arts. I had a friend who was being recruited to play softball there. The only reason I knew about it, and then started looking into it and was like, okay, checks a lot of the boxes. I love the East Coast, but the idea to go to California and be in sunny weather near beaches, sign me up. Has a great film school. I started looking into it, applied, got a scholarship. And so again, it just checked too many boxes and I had a phenomenal time.
For those who may not be familiar with what you're going to do from your freshman year to your senior year, do they have sports teams? Are they D1, D3? Are you getting a chance to do play-by-play? Are you doing film? What are the experiences like at your alma mater out on the West Coast?
Chapman University, proud alum.
The Camels? What are they called? The Kangaroos?
No, the Panthers. The
Panthers, okay.
Yeah. So they're Division III in the SCIAC Conference. And we actually had a UAlbany player, I believe, transfer from UAlbany to Chapman recently. So their Division III, their lacrosse program is really good. Just won the national championship, I believe, a couple years ago. Same with, I want to say, their baseball team. So high level Division III. Yeah, so the whole thing I wrote for the new student newspaper. When you're a broadcast journalism student from your freshman year to your senior, every Friday they do a 30-minute live student-run broadcast that airs on the local TV stations. So every Friday, that's what we were doing, and you learned every single position from the producer to the teleprompter to the technical director. You would rotate through anchoring, you do live shots, and then halfway through my freshman year, I decided I wanted to switch my major. So I put broadcast journalism as my minor, majored in English journalism because I wanted to do more writing. So that was a great combo for me to be able to still be writing, and then also get some of the technical skills from a broadcast journalism major.
Now, hang on a second. You're pivoting here to being a writer.
Hmm.
Like we let off with this, you are a television sports
Yeah.
personality. Is there another change that comes in college?
No, so my background was always in writing in high school because I wrote for the student newspaper. I was the senior sports writer um, of that. And it was only towards my senior year when I really started thinking about the broadcast side, which I'd always liked because, listening to that book and whatnot and watching every single live sporting event on the face of the earth. And then getting to college was when I really started doing my first reporting, live shot, anchor, all of those things that now are my day-to-day life.
Okay, so it's time to graduate. They got to throw you off campus. What is the goal post graduation? Is it to be hired as a beat writer, a feature columnist? Is it to do any job in sports? What happens for those final days after graduation?
Well, so again, backtrack a little. Once I got to college, then I really did start doing the broadcast side. And so right off the bat, I was lucky enough to have some great internships. I interned at the NFL Network, and then my senior year, I had an internship with a TV station in Los Angeles. And that was phenomenal because then I got to follow around Kurt Sandoval and Rob Fukuzaki. Rob Fukuzaki is one of the most prominent sports broadcasters, I mean, in the nation. I believe he's from Hawaii. He just celebrated some milestone out in LA. He's incredibly recognizable in the LA market. And so I got to go and tag along with them. And as the intern, I often say the story, my first day of my internship, got to see, I believe it was the Angels clinch the division, ran around the field. Albert Pujols sprayed champagne on us. 7 days later, Clayton Kershaw was on the mound. He helps the Dodgers clinch. So now we're at Dodger Stadium running around with all of them. And I'm like, this is the best job in the world. Sign me up. 7 days apart, I get to see two teams clinch and go to the postseason. I have still to this day yet to be back in a MLB locker room when they clinch, but that definitely, got me I was bit by the bug. And so coming out, I actually my spring break of senior year did a road trip from Los Angeles up to San Francisco, and I stopped at all the little local TV markets, and I had my demo and my resume, and I dropped my stuff off as I was going up. Didn't get any of the jobs, but had great recommendations, and so that was. So I knew I wanted to, be some form of sports broadcasting.
Let's go back a little bit too, especially for the people who might be going to college for the first time, considering going to a college, for the students who are looking to enter the career. Let's sit on that NFL Network internship for a second, because people might have had the reaction like I just did on our visual sign. The eyes lit up a little bit. For as much as you want to share, because you might still have relationships with people from back there, how did you land that internship?
Sure. So it was a student who was 2 years older than me. She had gotten an internship and she had interned there for maybe a year before. And I knew it was something I wanted to do. So we went and met for coffee, and I didn't know her too well. Talked about it. She was like, "Yeah, I'll send your resume to the hiring director. You know, recommendations." who you know, that is true in these settings. So I was able to get my resume into the director and went and had multiple interviews. And for anyone who is familiar, who's interned or worked at NFL Network, they make you take this test. And so it's this like, there's not really too much or too many ways you can study for it, but it's like history of the NFL. It's how many teams you have to write down, all the teams, you have to do the divisions, you have to, which of these person does not, it's like Drew Brees, Peyton Manning, boom, 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 or like which person doesn't belong. It's this NFL test. And for people who love the NFL, they're like, oh, sign me up. It's like Sporkle. But when you're in an interview room and you think this is going to be, the difference between getting the internship or not, it's incredibly stressful. But so got the internship, and pretty soon after, a good friend of mine also was able to get an internship. And so we interned there for 8 months. He then actually continued. He worked there for 6 years after college. And it was great. The thing that I would recommend for high school or college students is getting an internship potentially at like a local radio station, a local TV station in your market, even a local newspaper. I believe, will get more hands-on experiences than when you're at a place like NFL Network. I loved my time there, but you're part of a machine. Like you're seeing these guys who are on NFL Network game day on Sundays and whatnot, and you don't have as much connection where at a local. I mean, when I've come and done 104.5 The Team, some of your previous interns, they're in there with the room. They're, writing. So that type of interaction, I think, is invaluable.
Yeah, no doubt. When we're finding out different ways to actually learn and experience and get exactly what you want. So when you step to the next internship or the job, you can say, I've done it. I don't have to learn. I've done it. I've been able to have those opportunities. So as exciting as it is in California that you're getting to watch the Angels and the Dodgers clinch, as discouraging as it might be as you travel up the left coast trying to find that first job, it's not happening. But you're getting there journey takes you to a spot in Kansas, another random spot that people might not be able to find on the map. How does this first professional job happen for you?
So as many about to graduate journalism students, I'm sure will find out, you send out tons of applications. At least that was my experience. And I had created a tape. So it was both a news and sports tape that my friends and I kind of put together, some of the stuff from the student broadcast, and just sent it to as many emails, as many news directors as I could find. Got a couple responses and got one from Wichita, KWCH, in Wichita, Kansas. And they were hiring for a bureau reporter. And for people who are unfamiliar, like you think of a bureau, you think of they're reporting from CNN, the Paris or New York City bureau reporter, but there's also bureau reporters like in smaller places. So in Kansas, it's a wide state. They had bureau reporters down in Dodge City, which is, I guess, more southwest, Hays, Kansas, which is right in the center of Kansas, and somewhere else. And Wichita is on the other side. So basically, these bureau reporters are there to cover all the sports that are 3 hours away from the main station that you can't realistically go to every single day to get the stories. It was half news, half sports. And it was an opportunity to work for a station, KWCH, which had great reputation. They put a lot of kind of effort and energy into their sports program. We had a big sports team, Catch It Kansas, all dedicated to high school. Huge Friday night show that we streamed on the web and this and that. But it was very much half sports, half news. So I would cover breaking news out there as well.
That's not easy to all of a sudden flip the switch unless you found it to be easy, because a lot of people use the old expression, sports are the candy aisle of life, while the news can be hard hitting and the tones you have to have. Did you find it difficult to balance back and forth?
Well, the biggest thing was I'd never been to Kansas, and this was then the middle of Kansas, and I loved my time in Hays, but it's a very small town. It's 5 hours to Denver, 2 hours 45 minutes to Wichita, 3.5 to Kansas City. I mean, you are in the middle of not a lot. And I remember accepting the job literally the day of my graduation and being like, oh man, what are we getting into? And driving out to Hayes just by myself in my car, loaded up with my earthly belongings, being like, knowing this is going to be a journey, right? This is not going to be anything that I had ever experienced before. But also like, all right, cool. Graduated, have a job in a field that I wanted to do. So just taking it on, knowing it was going to be an adventure, and you kind of just have to dive in. So yes, it was I mean, they had me chasing tornadoes, right? You get a call at 10 o'clock because essentially you have to be on call the whole time as a breaking news reporter. Get a call, there's a tornado 40 miles west of you or whatever. In the car, I'm like, I've never seen a tornado. The only tornadoes I've seen is like Toto, like the Wizard of Oz. I do not know what I'm going into. So there are those moments where you're like, what have I gotten into? But I also wouldn't trade that experience for anything.
Geography wise, for those who are struggling with this map, which seems to be the theme of this episode, are you covering the Royals, the Chiefs, or Jayhawk basketball?
Oh, yeah, all of it. Yeah, so that was a really cool aspect. Even though I was a bureau reporter, I wasn't working in the main Wichita station. I was close to I-90, which meant that I could just hop on the highway and get to Kansas City in 3.5 hours. And so I was going to Royals games. I got to cover the Chiefs games at Arrowhead Stadium. Still to this day, the loudest athletic event I've ever been to in my life. When they come out and there's all this fire and these guys, it was an unbelievable experience. And then you cover K-State. I mean, football is religion at K-State, the same way that when you go to Allen Fieldhouse for University of Kansas, that's a religion. So I had, heard about Kansas basketball and had never been to Fog Allen at the Fieldhouse, and going there and covering games, covering K-State versus Kansas. So yes, got to cover all of those.
Was there anything during this time, that first year out in the field covering it? One of your colleagues here in the Capital Region, Jesse McWilliam, although he's a Spectrum guy, he talked about leaving the light off or on, or, oh no, I don't have it. Was there any of those first year rookie mistakes you look back at your time and think, oh my God, for young people, do not do what I just did at this moment?
Oh, I'm certain. So being a bureau reporter, for anyone who's going to take a job like this, you are really on your own. I mean, like the station, there was a small station and it was myself and on any given day, maybe one other person in it. So you're setting up your camera. We did this thing called the 2-minute drill. So I'd record, but set it up, and the studio was a closet. I mean, it was not a studio. It was padded a closet with like a little table. And so you're doing it all on your own. And if you forget to press record and you're all set up, what young journalists should do is you should look for the red light. That means you're recording. But if you're stressed and you're like, okay, I got to get this, make deadline, you go through your whole segment and then you go back to watch it and it's not there. And you're like, oh, I got to do this thing all over. One early rookie mistake, I sent back a story and I hadn't checked my audio levels. And so they were way too hot. And so when I guess someone else didn't check it either. And so when it aired, the highlights were like blowing out. You couldn't hear the person who was doing the play-by-play. So always check your levels for whether it's radio, whether it's TV, whether you're doing a podcast, your levels have to be good.
I can't wait for somebody with the headphones of this episode to be like, good levels, guys. You and Gardner, nice job with the levels, man. I enjoyed it mowing my lawn the other day.
Yeah.
All right, so as amazing as this story is going to go, like the moves from DC to Maryland to California to now we're in the middle of, as you said, not a lot in Kansas. So it's a straight jump from here to Albany. That even out loud sounds like insane, because usually it's a few more markets in between until you get to a place like Albany that dances between top 55 to 65. Is that the jump? And if so, how does it happen?
Well, because Wichita is, I don't know if Wichita top 75, top 60. And so I don't actually know. Don't hold me to that. It is top 75. But so over the 2 years I was there, I then did get experience filling in anchoring, did a bunch of live shots. So after 2 years, I had a fine tape, not a lot of anchor experience. But the recommendations are coming from a top 75 market. My news director at the time, Brian Gregory and Kim Wilhelm, who's still the news director there, wonderful people, and had a great relationship with them and still do. But then at the end of those 2 years, I was ready to not be a bureau reporter anymore. And I wanted to do purely sports. And so I declined an opportunity to go be a news reporter in Wichita and packed my stuff up. And my dad and I drove from Kansas back up to DC, and did not have a job. I had a bunch of applications out, but I was like, okay, this is, it's run its course doing this news and sports thing. And so had applied to a bunch of different stations, one in Iowa, just all over the place, and had a really good interview process with the then news director of WRGB here in the Capital Region, and flew up for an interview, and things started to progress quite quickly. My first interview, though, I flew up, and it was supposed to be, I'd never done this before. It was supposed to be I'd fly from DC to Albany at like 8 a.m., go spend the day at WRGB, and then fly back on like the 9 p.m. flight, all in a day. But there was like a fire at one of the control towers. So then I was stuck in Albany for the night. So it was kind of like okay, well, maybe it's meant to be. But then I came and I did a test. They have you do like a anchor test, essentially, to see. And I was so nervous. The news director, and Brittany Devane, now Brittany McHatton, who, you're friends with, her. She and the news director were watching from the control room. The news director was like, "What have we done? Like, this guy can't be on air." And so he set Brittany down with like napkins and like a cup of water, like, "Hey, you can like just calm down, relax." And so for the first year that I was there, my news director never let me live that down. When I had started getting more comfortable on air, he was like, "Yeah, we didn't know if we had made a mistake hiring you." So that's how it panned out.
Well, Gardner, it is still rare though. Even that point you brought up, like the start of that story, where you kind of the radio term used to be on the beach. Like you had gone from having a job to kind of waiting for the next opportunity. That in itself is rare, because some people might look at that and say, "Well, why wasn't he employed when we hired him? Why was he waiting? What was he doing?" And I'm not saying you made the wrong decision, because you're working now professionally, what you want to do. But I think some people would have viewed that move by you as a risk, or, hey, if you're changing, you've got a job in front of you, just take the job. You don't regret doing that, but would you do it? Would you recommend doing that to other people?
I think that's a decision that the individual has to make on their own, because the situation may dictate a different approach, right? If you have a different family situation, I didn't have, any kids, or I didn't have anyone that I needed to, at that moment, continue to provide for. So I could, and Kansas, I was not paying a ton for rent. So I was able to financially say, okay, I can be unemployed for a couple weeks. And it turned out to be 5 weeks. But also, I knew that I didn't want to sign another contract to do something that wasn't sports. I would have then been Monday through Friday, or 5 days a week, whatever my schedule would have been, news. And I was not prepared to do that, whether it be breaking news, you're covering a shooting or a robbery or this. I didn't want to do that. And so that was the sacrifice I knew I needed to make at that time of, okay, I'm not prepared. I'm not willing to do this. The payoff is going to be, it's essentially you're betting on yourself that something better is going to come. And it did.
And the bet paid off. And there you are. You're hired by CBS 6 in Albany. Yes. Now, you mentioned Brittany there. And as I always like to say in every podcast, this is the part of the podcast where we can say as little or as much as you want, because this is your current employer. So if you feel like, guys, I can't answer that, I totally respect that. Yeah. But when you get hired, there's 3 people as a part of your team. So take us kind of how your responsibilities change from when you have the 3-person team at CBS until Brittany leaves, and that kind of evolves to this 2-person team with you and a former guest on this show, Chet Davis.
Sure. So I was hired as the number 3. And at the time, we had the Upstate Sports Edge, which you graciously appeared on a nearly weekly basis. It was a 30-minute show that aired on the CW15, Monday through Friday. And so that's a beast of a show. 30 minutes of content every single night, when there are plenty of days that don't have 30 minutes worth of content. So we would figure it out. We would do stories. We did, I mean, that's some of the stuff that I think still just, I'm very proud that we were able to produce the content that we were. Then fast forward, a couple years, and Brittany, so I was the number 3. So I was essentially, would shoot for Chet on the weekends when there was football on Saturdays. I would report during the week. I would co-host the Upstate Sports Edge with Brittany on Chet's days off, or vice versa. When Brittany was off, Chet and I would do it. But then a couple years ago, then Brittany got married and got a job in Maine, which is where she now lives, as she was one of the morning news anchors. Now she's, I believe, the 5 or 6 p.m. News anchors up in Maine, where she and her now husband live. And that's phenomenal. And it's wonderful that she doesn't have to do the long distance. But then it changed to Chet Davis became sports director. I became the weekend sports anchor. And that kind of went into effect right when the pandemic, I mean, really February of 2020 was when that was her first month where she had left, and then Chet became sports director. I became weekend. The Upstate Sports Edge shrank from a 30-minute show to a smaller portion of the 10 o'clock news. And then, I mean, your responsibilities completely change, because now Chet's Monday through Friday anchoring those shows. I report for him 3 days a week, and then I anchor the shows on the weekend. So a lot more anchoring responsibilities, which was great and a new challenge. And then during football season, Chet and I co-anchor the 5th quarter. But I mean, we got thrown into this February. We had 30 days, which was like it was a month of the craziest, because you had so much high school state championship stuff. Sienna was like on a run to another MAC title. Chet was going to travel down to Atlantic City. I mean, it was we were thrown into the fire for that first month, and then COVID hits. So it's been a wild year plus.
Yeah, it's like a year and a half plus, and it probably feels like 5 to 10 years to go through that. I've already covered a lot of the COVID stuff with Chet, and I think for this portion of this, because I think we're further and further away from COVID every single day, which is good. But I do want to go back to what you mentioned there about Sienna and high school basketball. Let's just kind of go through a Friday night, if you can, for us, because we're taping this in October of 2021. Take us through what a Friday night is like. You mentioned what it was like in Kansas, but here in the Capital Region in upstate New York, it's you and Chet, tag team champions of the world, attacking Friday nights here in the 518.
So we also we do get some help. So we'll have a photographer who is assigned to shoot a couple games with us as well. But for example, a normal Friday, so we have a 5th quarter, which airs at 10 and 11. We get extra time. So normally on Monday through Friday, Chet gets 3.5 minutes for sports. If there's a big sports story, he can ask for more time. Then if the producer is really nice that day and they give him some more time, that's wonderful. For the 5th quarter, we get more time, 7.5, 8 minutes of content, because there's so much going on. What we also do, though, is in 5 o'clock and 6:30, I will be at our CBS 6 game of the week with a live preview of the game. So that actually starts on Thursday. I'll go to a practice of one of the teams from our game of the week, talk to a coach, talk to a player, put together a storyline to watch for in that game. I'll come into work 1 or 2 o'clock on Friday, put that together, link up with our photographer. Okay, we're going here to shoot to do our live shots. We'll do the live shots at the stadium of the high school, 5, and then in 6:30 for Chat for Sports. Then you got your little schedule. It's normally 2 to 3 games a night. So you leave from the live shot, go straight to wherever. We go up to Glens Falls. You'll go to Cambridge, but then there's also a ton around here: Shenandoah, Shaker, Colony, all of these different schools. You get there, you shoot as much as you can in the first quarter. If you get 2 touchdowns in the first 2 minutes and another great play, boom, get to the next game. Then you got to shoot the next game. But sometimes you show up to a game, it's 3-0 at the half, and you're like, oof, I got 2 more games I got to cover. because after you've shot those games, you got to go back to the station, edit it all together, write the scripts, get all pretty, put your suit and tie on, and then go co-anchor the show. So it is a mad dash. And the thing is, there's no real other way to do it unless you had so many cameras that Chet and I could be in the studio and never having to shoot. You are always going to be running around, but that's part of the fun. That's part of like the adrenaline and what makes those nights so fun.
That's what you signed up for. That's a part of the gig. This is what the opportunity is. That's exactly the way they have the attitude with that and all those things that are happening. And also, every time we have a sports anchor on, I like to just give this warning to all the parents out there. They did not leave the game to miss your kid's touchdown. Please don't boo the anchors when they leave. Please. They are doing the best they can.
Yeah, exactly. Normally we have 2 to 3 games that we also have to get to, a night, and you'll show up and people are like, "Oh, you missed the best part." And you're like, "I'm doing my best, man."
You know what? Let's add to the. I didn't think I was going to go here, but let's add one other complaint we'd like to clear up here. Would you like to defend your pal Chet, or maybe you want to take the hate emails from now on? Would you also like to confirm that you guys have no say over what games you guys air when it comes to NFL coverage, especially here in Albany, the battle between the Jets and the Bills that are going on? Please do not blame these guys. Gardner, take us through what happens for those who complain to you on social media.
Right. So, because the Giants are, on Fox, and so they get those games, and so we will often either have a Jets game or a Bills game or a Patriots game. And leading up, once it gets announced or once people check their schedules, okay, the Bills got a big game, they'll check, and if CBS 6 isn't airing that game, then the emails and the calls start to come in. Which my biggest thing of the whole thing is I understand. I know what it's like to be a kid, the Washington football team now not being on your TV, and you're ticked off because not everyone has Red Zone or NFL Ticket. Chet and I cannot change the game. We don't choose it. We have no rooting interest. If a team has a great matchup, we wish that were the game, but we do not have control. A lot of the people do not seem to realize that, and that's okay. But we get some very strongly worded emails.
Years ago, I thought it was funny to mess with Brittany and Chet. I think it might have even been before you were there. Like, remember, email Brittany Devane, email Chet. And then Chet started sending me the emails. I mean, dude, I'm sorry. I didn't realize it was that bad. I thought it was a joke. I thought it was just some random. No. They come in every week for you guys. Doesn't matter who they pick.
We had a guy wish bad luck to Chet and my family. Like, dude, what the? But no, most of the time they're not personal. And so, yeah, to clear it up, we do not control.
Even though you've had the baseball and rooting interest, and you've in that weird DC Maryland spot of the Nationals weren't around, so it was like the Orioles and a mix of teams you could have root for during that time. It feels as if the Yankee pregame show for you guys has become your baby. Like that has become your thing. Okay, you've embraced it. Take us through for those who haven't had an opportunity to watch. When we're taping this, by the way, is hours before Yankees Red Sox. So for those who haven't watched the pregame show, kind of explain why that has become kind of maybe your most well-known thing here in the area.
Sure. So that was also when I was hired on as the number 3 position back in 2017. The Yankees pregame show is a partnership with CBS 6 and the CW15, where each year we have 22 to 24 Yankees games that will air on either the CW15 or CBS 6. And for those games, we produce, again, a 30-minute Mohawk Honda Yankees pregame show. And that airs, say that first pitch is at 7. It'll air at 6:30. On the weekends, if it's at 1 o'clock, 12:30. And that is something that I took on when I first started and then continued to, because it was just, it's a lot to produce for. It takes, a full day the day before, sort of producing, writing all the scripts, cutting all the video, because it's a 30-minute show. If you imagine if you listeners watch the news, a normal news show is 30 minutes, 6 to 6:30, 5 to 5:30, whatever. That's all Yankees show stuff. And so it's a lot of content to produce for but it's also a lot of fun. I mean, you're in New York, and this is one of the biggest teams. We have a lot of Red Sox fans, also a lot of Mets fans, and this is a point I want to make. This is part of my job. I did not choose to do the Yankees pregame show. I've also gotten stuff on social media saying, "We know you're a Yankees fan." No, I'm a Yankees fan. If I have any rooting interest, it's for the Washington Nationals. But because you're doing a Yankees pregame show, I mean, I know more about the New York Yankees than I do about any other team that I, root for from back home. And so it's actually been a very, very fun thing to do. And again, we finished up last week our final Yankees pregame show. And again, it's something that you're proud of when you look back on 23 shows. Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be proud of because you mentioned how much of a bear and a beast some of the local
Mhm.
content can be. When you move it to a national sense, too, it is still a tough task to take on when that calls for that opportunity. Now,
But
before
also
this,
fun.
yeah, absolutely.
Mhm.
Yeah, no doubt.
Yeah.
Before we connected on this interview, and I did prep for this interview, and I mentioned just because my hair's like that. Like I showed Gardner my hair before as if it got any better. I thought about this. I'm like, at least here in Albany, we mentioned COVID, but when you start talking about like media members, television, radio, newspapers, as I like to call it, non-traditional podcasts and Facebook and Instagram, I'm wondering if you've been the person most affected by COVID because your role changed in February of 2020. You've done a lot of your shows within the studio. You haven't been able to be out live. I'm thinking about it. Like, Gardner, you might have been the most affected by this because your opportunity to kind of be the number two guy got halted. So do you have goals for this upcoming year and for the future that you haven't had the opportunity to do the last 18 months?
Well, I think because COVID so dramatically changed what we did. I mean, we stopped doing sports, and I know you covered this with Chet. But we stopped doing sports for that whatever 5-month span. Once it started to slowly kick back into gear, kind of August of 2020. I mean, one of the worst parts was fans weren't allowed at a lot of these events, but we still were. So that meant the track. That meant going to Albany and Siena basketball games. So, like, oddly, from a coverage standpoint, we still got to cover a lot of the same teams. You just didn't get the incredible fan support. You didn't get the length of the season. There weren't the state championships. But I think in terms of a goal for the future, starting with this football season, with this fall high school football season and UAlbany football season, and Union and RPI, it's starting to feel more normal. And so we're just trying to, now that the Yankee show is done, during the week, obviously we focus on Chet shows. And so for me, it's supplementing Chet shows with obviously the highlights of the games, but then also packages. You want to find the storylines. And that's often hard when there's only two of us. We only overlap a couple days of the week. And so you got to adjust schedules. With No More Yankee show, the week becomes finding those good storylines. And then on the weekend, it's just covering, because you got high school football, high school soccer, basketball is about to start up, and football. So I would actually say the last 6 months have not felt, 2021 hasn't felt as different.
No, it totally makes sense. I see what you're going, where things are finally getting back to what you've signed up for and what you wanted.
Right.
Now, you mentioned something earlier in this, and I think it's something we got to go back to because you mentioned that divide and that push of, oh, you're a Yankee fan because you're doing Yankee coverage, especially, again, for young broadcasters and people going through this. There is that learning curve of just because you like something doesn't mean the person watching the show likes that. Mike Greenberg had the great quote of, his job was not to generate interest. His job was to reflect interest. And that's whether it be audio or visual, that's the case. And I think in you in particular, I know you're a huge NBA fan. Like, you love the NBA, and I'm sure there have been times where you want to show maybe more Knicks highlights now that they've gotten better. We've got the local connection in Albany with Kevin Herter for the Hawks. Do you find that frustrating, or do you do your best to kind of, okay, I know I love the NBA. I just got to find ways to put this in when big things happen in the area?
Yes. That's what
I can tell you want more basketball. I can tell.
Well, so I think one thing back to what you were talking about younger journalists and I know this kind of clashes with some sports journalists who don't think you should root for any team. I think it is okay if you have a favorite team and if you have loved that team since you were 2. That's how I feel about the Wizards or the Washington football team. That does not impact what I do on a day-to-day basis at work. I'm not showing Washington football highlights. I'm not saying that last year that Dwayne Haskins was better than Daniel Jones, because he wasn't. But like, also that thing, as long as you're able to leave that behind, that doesn't matter. What matters, what type of movie or music you like. That's not informing your decisions at work. In terms of the NBA, I absolutely love the NBA. And with the Knicks being better, and then Kevin Huerter now starring in the NBA with the Atlanta Hawks, you kind of just have to let the games and the importance of the different storylines dictate that. So there are going to be some games during the winter when the Knicks, the Nets, the Celtics are all playing and there's no other storyline. So then you are going to show some NBA highlights. But if it's a Saturday night and both Albany and Siena play at home, and then their men's or women's teams, their counterparts are on the road, and you have a 12 o'clock basketball showcase at the Armory, I'm not going to squeeze in a random Knick game just because I want to. With Kevin Huerter, the same way it is with Ian Anderson, with any of the local guys, we will always show highlights. We will always feature them as part of the content, just because there is such high interest in those local players.
And even though there's this high interest in local players, it leads to the question that some people who are not familiar with television sports anchoring might wonder, like, okay, everybody would love to have Kevin Huerter on every single night. Everybody would love to have a certain athlete on every single night. And I feel like, in particular, when you guys are out in the field, we'll say, are on location, it almost is this battle between old school versus new school. I said this to Jesse McWilliam as well. Like, I think some people think there's this clash of, okay, they're going to fight for this exclusive. Mike Barth, formerly ABC 10, who's a DC, Maryland guy like you, like, that is not the case, unless you're going to break it right here and said, you put Liana Bonavita in a headlock and said, that's my story, and get out of the way.
No, and that's actually one thing that I have loved about my time here in the Capital Region, is how the camaraderie within the local news, and specifically sports, because that's what I'm familiar with. For example, yesterday started the day at Siena basketball held their first practice. Monday, October 4th, just because I know this is coming out. So Monday, October 4th, Siena basketball holds its first practice. I'm there. Jesse's there. Ashley's there. Jared's there. Those are the 4 TV stations. We're all wonderful. If we could, this is not allowed. If we could, I know we would share highlights. If I got a play that they didn't get to because they were at a different game, I would send them that highlight. We can't do that, but I'm saying I would. And then you also have all the print reporters as well, who everyone has at Michael Kelly. You have all of these people who are essentially, and I'm using that as an example because you're covering a lot of the same stuff. So it doesn't make any sense to be a jerk. It doesn't make any sense to sort of be standoffish. You're going to be around these people. It was like with you, or when I see Levac at a Albany game. I mean, like, you're going to be around these people sometimes more than your friends Monday through Friday. And it's also just a blessing that other people in this in the Capital Region feel the same way.
No fights. This is not the Anchorman scene. As much as we'd like to see pitchforks and tridents, it's not happening in Albany. I'm waiting for the first guest who says, I got in a brawl over that 60-second quote I need. It hasn't happened yet, though.
No. I would say I guess the only time it gets contentious is if you're watching sports with one of those fans off the clock.
That's right. That's right.
A different team.
I mentioned hoops. I got to ask about the hoodie, because I originally thought that was the Kevin Huerter logo for Shenwood. It is not.
This is
WNBA.
Yeah.
What do we got going on?
WNBA. Yeah.
Washington Mystics.
Oh yeah. This
nice.
is the WNBA hoodie that I think it came out maybe 2 years ago. Or
I love it, man. Good stuff. I saw the orange too, and of course I had to ask with all the orange going on this podcast on the visual side.
Well, yeah, and all the Syracuse fans who love your stuff.
Yeah, we'll edit that in and say it's a Syracuse hoodie for the audio side. Right. No one will know the difference.
Right.
All right, man. I know you got a little bit of time off today, but I want to get you with this before I let you go. The best advice to get where you are now, if somebody young's listening, they want to head back to maybe their hometown, they want to work for CBS 6, they want to find a new market, they maybe are doing what you did, the same road where it seemed to be journalism, but you headed into television and sports. The best advice you can offer somebody to get where you are in your career right now?
Sure. And I'll break it down to high school and college, or middle school, whatever, or you're out of college, whatever, is just do it. So whether that means you're in high school, sign up to write for the student newspaper. go start a Medium blog. If you don't have a student newspaper, do a Medium, do a blog that you can go cover the football team, or then go cover the field hockey team, go cover the lacrosse team, go cover a swimming event, go find these stories that maybe every Friday night the high school football team gets coverage in the paper. That makes sense. Then go somewhere else that doesn't get as much coverage, because then you'll have access, and I guarantee you those coaches will appreciate that you're doing a story. So then maybe they'll give you additional stories in the future. If your high school has a TV show that they put on, student run TV show, be part of that. In college, the exact same thing. One thing that I didn't do as much of in college is take advantage of learning about the cameras, learning about editing, learning about the technical side, because that will only put you ahead of when you go in and start your first job on day one. If you already know how to edit on the editing software, that puts you at a huge advantage. It just makes it so much more comfortable where you can seamlessly transition. And I mean, it sounds cliche, but there really is no substitute for just doing it. And especially now with social media, with Medium, with podcasts, with YouTube, there are forums that you don't have to be part of. You don't have to have an internship at the local paper for you to get your work seen.
It's such a different world, man, from when you were in college, when I was in college, even offering that advice now. Sometimes I hear the advice that you just offered, and I'm like, I wonder if that's what we would have done, how much different it would have been. And also one other piece of advice: buy When the Crowd Roars. Bring it to CBX's studio, and Gardner will sign it. I don't think he'd ever be more proud if you ordered that on Amazon. He said, I heard that podcast he did with Gaz, and my life has changed because of Bob Costas reading off what's called a DVD right now.
Oh, it's a classic.
CD.
Yep.
I said DVD, like it's a CD, as if that's more of a current reference of either one of those things. Yeah. Gardner, my friend, I appreciate you doing this, man. Keep up the great work over at CBS 6, and looking forward to all the coverage for the rest of the year, and keep up the great work, man.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, and look forward to seeing you soon.